Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Shaw here. We're going to finish up World War II today. I thought we'd go ahead and talk about the atomic bomb, but we're really going to talk more about how it had such an impact on the end of the war and really the rest of the world after. The world is never the same after the atomic bomb is dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So let's get right into it. So again, I'm kind of skipping over a ton of stuff. Like there is. The Nazis were doing really well until they tried to invade the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union gets involved. They're back on a two-front war now with the United States and Britain against the United States and Britain on the western side, and then the Soviet Union on the eastern side. So as soon as that happens, Nazis really start struggling. Italy is actually knocked out first. The U.S. troops actually will go through Africa, northern Africa, and then up through the boot heel of Italy to knock them out of the war. And then that's pretty early, actually. I think it's in 1943. And then by the end of 1944 and 5, it's really just Hitler and Germany against all of the Allies. So by February about 1945, we know that the war is pretty much done. So they meet, the Allies meet in February of 1945, specifically all of the leaders of the Allies, FDR, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin. They meet in Yalta. They have the Yalta Conference, and they're trying to figure out what's going to happen with the world after this war. So really what the main concern with everybody is, what are we going to do with Germany? Because we don't really want to give, and we can't give it all to Stalin because he might turn it into a communist nation. And Stalin doesn't want to give it all to the democracies because he doesn't want to have another democracy really close to all of his communist nations. So they agree to split Germany up into 4 different parts. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the last conference. But again, they decide here that they're gonna split it up. Stalin also promises to help the United States against Japan after Germany is defeated, and he also promises to hold free elections in Eastern Europe. Again, these are in like communist countries, and he had kind of taken over parts of Poland, and he's not going to do that. Just he doesn't want to have free elections. And well, I mean, even if he does, maybe he would just say, "Hey, you are free to elect me," and that's pretty much it. So we're getting some. It seems like we're making some progress, but not really, unfortunately. And then FDR also is going to get support at the conference to establish what's known as the United Nations, and this is going to be kind of the League of Nations, but actually effective. And so and we'll talk more about that a little bit later because that's a really big part of this, of World War II, because it does establish a kind of a peacekeeping organization, a world peacekeeping organization, and this time the United States does join, and it's still around today. So we'll talk more about that a little bit in class and a little bit later in this video. So in April 1945, the Soviet army is going to storm Berlin. Hitler is going to commit suicide. And the reason he did that was when Mussolini was overthrown in Italy, people were absolutely brutal with his body. Like they hanged him, and then they just left his body like up in like the square, and just people would like come and spit on him and beat his body for like a week after he was dead. And so Hitler didn't want any of that. And so he decided to commit suicide. They actually burned his body, and theoretically, for all you conspiracy theorists out there. Anyway, so Eisenhower is going to accept the unconditional surrender of the German Reich, and so now Germany is out, Italy's out, the last remaining Axis power is Japan. And so May 8th, 1945 is known as VE Day, that is Victory in Europe Day. And we unfortunately do have the death of a president at this time. Actually, a little bit before the war ends, on April 12th, FDR dies, and then Vice President Harry Truman, the only president from Missouri so far, he becomes president. So again, FDR is really monumental for a number of reasons, but the main thing is that he was the only president ever elected to 4 terms, or to more than 2 terms, and he only served about 1 year. Actually, not even that long, probably about like 3 months or so of his his fourth term, but still he was a a really fantastic president, especially during the war. He didn't really do much to end the Depression, but he tried. But he was a really good leader during the war that America needed. All right, so we're getting to the end here, the end of the war now. Again, it's gonna really end. Japan's gonna surrender in September of 1945, but we need to figure out how to get there. So the Manhattan Project has been going on since pretty early in the war. A guy by the name of Robert Oppenheimer is the research director of the Manhattan Project. He was working with other scientists such as Albert Einstein, and they were trying to develop something. They were trying to split the atom and just create enormous amounts of energy. And the destructive power was like unlike anything the world had seen before. So by July of 1945, the atomic bomb was tested in the New Mexico desert. There was a successful detonation, and it was a horrifying sight. These people are, again, we've never seen anything like this. So now we have a couple options. Since it's just Japan left, and Japan is an interesting country because in their culture there is really no word for surrender at this point. So they were going to fight pretty much until the last man was dead. So if we had decided to invade Japan, it would have been a very costly invasion. A lot of people who estimated what the invasion would be, that they said that hundreds of thousands of U.S. soldiers would die. So that's one option, is we can invade Japan. Now, the other problem with that is that the Soviet entry, Soviet would basically be able, if the Soviets get involved, they could take over Japan. They could beat us to Tokyo, and that would allow them to essentially run Japan's, reconciliation or their rebuilding, and that's bad. We don't want that. So the atomic bomb is a much faster solution that would allow us to kind of end the war quickly and then kind of take over. Japan would surrender to us instead of the Soviets. And also the atomic bomb could also be like a message to the Soviets. It's kind of like, hey, we have this, and we are willing to use it, apparently. And so the Soviets don't have anything like this at the time, and they're thinking about, or Truman is kind of thinking about using it kind of as a message to the Soviets. That's just kind of another thing going on in the back of his mind. If it's not used, it's going to waste a lot of money. Again, we're talking about millions of dollars, okay, being poured into the research on the atomic bomb. Again, the bombs themselves were, going to be millions of dollars. So some scientists had doubts about the bombs. Some people are going to have really, like a lot of people are going to die. Like, that's really, is the cost of human life. Again, yes, we're trying to weigh human life, of the enemy, and then human life of the United States, or American citizens, rather. And that's really it. We don't really know, that's the horrible decision that Truman has to make. And he makes a decision that it is better to drop the bomb, to end the war as quickly as possible. And he does so. So he orders the military to drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan. So the first one's going to be at Hiroshima, August 6th. That is the major military center. It's absolutely demolished by the bomb. You see here in the lower left-hand corner the estimated deaths. So the population it was about 330,000, and the deaths by December of 1945. Again, so some people are going to have really, really bad problems with radiation, and they are actually going to die of radiation poisoning, sickness, stuff like that. So it was estimated that about 90,000 to 120,000, and this is kind of an old map, to be honest with you, but it's still pretty close to the estimates. So again, about 90,000 to 120,000 had died by December 1945. And then 3 days later, again, so nothing happened. No one surrendered after 3 days. So 3 days later, they decided to drop a second bomb on Nagasaki, and the population there is about 250,000, and the deaths estimated by December 1945 were about 60 to 80,000. So and again, then you see that. So after that, no other bombs dropped. But about a month later, it takes a while. And again, the kind of the reasoning there is they have to get the right people in charge to figure out how to do this, because most people are not going to be okay with this surrender. They don't want to look weak, and they don't. But again, they don't want any more people to die. So again, it takes about a month, but by September 2nd, 1945, Japan does surrender. And again, and you see, like, this is probably some of the worst damage we've ever seen in the world. And it's now the world is a changed place. Now with nuclear technology, with the atom bomb, it's never going to be the same. So especially once the Soviets get a hold of the technology, and that's really going to be the main force driving the Cold War itself. So anyway, we'll get to that next unit. But we have a few other things to fix, or a few other things to kind of deal with. First thing is the United Nations, as I mentioned, in June of 1945, again, before the war is over, delegates are going to sign the charter establishing the UN, and about October 24th, 1945, the UN becomes official. So the first thing they do is they commission a document to declare the fundamental equal rights of all human beings. And in 1948, after about 2 years, they develop what's known as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this is really, and part of the reason they do this is because of the horrors of the Holocaust. So during this, again, we want to make sure that all nations are being treated appropriately during this time. And Germany had definitely violated human rights by imprisoning and incarcerating, torturing, and killing essentially 6 million Jewish people all throughout Europe. So after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is adopted, and again, we're charting kind of some new paths here, and really what we know now at the end of the war is that the United States and the Soviet Union are the only two superpowers remaining. France was taken over during the war. Germany lost. Italy lost. Britain was severely weakened by their role in the war. They had to fight Germany alone for about a year. So the U.S. and the USSR are really it. So now we are going to kind of use they're going to use the United Nations as a forum to kind of spread their influence over others. And now we're really in it. The Cold War is a war where no fighting actually takes place. That's not true. No direct fighting actually takes place, but the United States and the Soviet Union are competing for world dominance essentially. And we'll get into that next unit. But we want to go ahead and finish up here. I think I got 2 more slides. The Potsdam Conference is what actually ends the war. It's in July of 1940, at least ends the war in Europe. So the Allied leaders are going to come together for the final wartime conference. Stalin actually decided to refuse to allow the free elections in Poland that he had promised earlier. He actually didn't get along. Him and Truman did not get along very well at all. Stalin and FDR had a much better relationship. Stalin also bans democratic parties in the Soviet Union, which is again unfortunate because Churchill and Truman had really thought that they had made some progress with him. So Truman was convinced that the U.S. and Soviet aims are deeply at odds, that there was no way they were going to be able to reconcile them and come to a consensus about what to do. And the conference really focuses on, like I said, it focuses on how to deal with post-war Germany. So what they do, part of the problem is Truman doesn't want the Soviets to get reparations from Germany. So what they do is they decide, as I mentioned earlier, they decide to divide it up into 4 occupation zones. The Navy and merchant fleet of Germany is also divided into 4 different zones. And we'll talk about that because that's going to play a really big role in the Cold War as well. But that's for another video. The last thing I wanted to mention, or one of the last things I wanted to mention, was the Nuremberg war trials. The Nuremberg trials were trials of the Nazi leaders. Again, Hitler's dead, but there were still a lot of people in the upper echelons of the Nazi ranks that were put on trial for the Holocaust and for the things that they did. They were tried, they were sentenced, they were charged with crimes against humanity, against the peace, war crimes, and they were eventually hanged. And these And this is a really important principle because you need to understand that people are responsible for their own actions in war. This is the idea that if your commander gives you a bad order and you follow it, that you are still, yes, your commander did something wrong, but you following the order also means that you did something wrong as well. So you still have to use your own judgment when you are receiving orders from a commanding officer, and that's a really important principle to know. Just because we're kind of in the idea of you can't allow somebody who is crazy to tell you what to do, and if you do it again, you are still held responsible for that. Oh, hey, I was wrong. We're all done. Hey guys, it's been a wild ride. Appreciate you being here. Take it easy. I'll see you in the next one.